The day felt strange, capping off a bizarre week for Irvin Dusty, the garbage collector. As he headed to work that morning, he sensed something off in the air, a tension he couldn't quite grasp. It had been gnawing at him since last week, when his wife mentioned the party. He couldn't articulate it if asked, didn't consciously dwell on it, but he felt uneasy, as if he was silently anticipating something unexpected. It was just a feeling, but it made him anxious and on edge all day at work. He struggled to focus. Truth be told, he didn't want to go to the party, especially not his wife's office gatherings. "Those smug lawyers," he grumbled inwardly, "think they're all high and mighty." His wife insisted, though, saying it wouldn't be right to skip the office Christmas party. He always went along with what she wanted. As he shut down his computer to end the week, Dusty glanced at a photo of his 2 sons from a fishing trip last year and smiled warmly. His bond with his boys seemed to be the only bright spot in his home life lately. On his drive home, he found himself lost in his thoughts and barely noticed the traffic slowing due to an accident on the highway. As a result, he arrived home about 15 minutes later than usual. Instead of a welcoming kiss, he braced himself for his wife's sharp comment. She didn't disappoint. "Couldn't make it home on time for once, huh, Tracy Gright?" she sneered. "Now hurry up and change into your gray pinstripe suit. It's my favorite." Dusty sighed inwardly. He had planned to wear his dark blue suit, which he felt gave him more authority. The gray one was nice, but he didn't want to fade into the background among these people. James Fielding, the newest partner at Chicago's most prominent criminal law firm, hosted the firm's annual holiday party at his spacious home on the north side of the city. As they walked in, Dusty sensed Tracy growing increasingly tense. She spoke rapidly, and her blinking eyes betrayed her stress. As they approached what seemed to be a large gathering area, Tracy's grip on Dusty's arm tightened, and she pulled him aside, pressing him against the wall and embracing him. "Tracy, what's wrong? Is everything okay?" he asked. "No, I just wanted to tell you," she replied. "Listen, Dusty, you know I love you. I always have, and I want you to remember that. Whatever happens tonight, it won't affect us. Nothing will ever change between us. Just keep that in mind. We're fine. I know you're not fond of these people, and it might be tough, but as long as you remember that nothing will change between us, you'll be okay." "I don't understand what you mean," Dusty said. "You're right. I don't belong with all these lawyers and high-powered individuals. But what's important is that nothing changes between us. These events have never been enjoyable for me, but I'll endure it as I always have. Just remember, we're okay," she assured him. Stepping back, she allowed him to guide her into the room. Fielding held court by a large bar, adorned with a painting of a reclining woman without clothes. Dusty moved to the side of the bar to fetch a white wine for Tracy and a scotch for himself, exchanging a nod with Fielding as their eyes briefly met. Fielding nodded back at Dusty, wearing a sinister grin that Dusty despised. In fact, he wasn't sure if he didn't hate Fielding as well. Dusty grabbed the 2 glasses and hurried over to intercept Tracy, who was making her way toward Fielding and his group. Tracy eventually reached Fielding, who greeted her with a polite kiss on the cheek before returning to his conversation. Standing on the outskirts, Dusty found himself zoning out of the discussion. He glanced around, catching sight of the nude painting once more, and couldn't help but think it was typical for Fielding to display such a provocative piece. As Dusty turned back into the room, he sensed several pairs of eyes on him. Instinctively, he checked his suit for spills or open flies, finding nothing amiss. Yet the stares persisted. Unsettled, Dusty turned towards the bar, stealing another glance at the painting. It struck Dusty as incredibly sensual. The raven-haired woman without clothes sprawled on the bed, clearly after a very fulfilling encounter. The resemblance was uncanny, almost too accurate. Dusty's thoughts ceased. In fact, he stopped breathing momentarily. He stood motionless, fixated on the painting. Unbeknownst to him, Fielding and his wife exchanged smirks. Gradually, the attention of others in the room shifted towards Dusty, some smirking, others showing pity. After what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 10 seconds, Dusty regained his composure and whispered to his wife, "That's you." The room fell completely silent as Dusty's whispered words echoed, sounding louder than he intended. "No," Tracy replied softly. "That woman has black hair, and I have auburn, silly." She giggled softly, but her attempt to brush it off only made her denial seem less genuine. Several people glanced between Tracy and the painting, while others chuckled quietly. Fielding gave Tracy a quick wink. Dusty glanced at his wife, then back at the painting. In a subdued tone, he uttered, "Black hair, but auburn pubic hair. Your pubic hair." Tracy scrutinized the painting closely. Despite having seen it before, she hadn't noticed that the painter had accurately depicted her pubic hair color, unlike her hair on her head. She pondered whether it was intentional or a mistake, though it hardly mattered. Tracy had anticipated that Dusty would eventually recognize the painting as her, but neither she nor Fielding had expected it to happen so soon in the evening, especially before Dusty had a few drinks to ease him up. Dusty felt firm hands grip him, steering him out of the main room into a smaller adjacent one. Fielding and Tracy followed closely behind, with Fielding casting a disdainful look at Dusty. "Listen up, you insignificant loser. Here's the deal. Your wife belongs to me now. You get to keep her in your pathetic home life when I'm not using her," Fielding sneered. "Try to resist, and the firm will represent Tracy, leaving you with nothing, while I continue to have my way with her." Dusty's gaze darted between Fielding and his wife, feeling utterly trapped. "This has been happening for a while, and you never had a clue," Tracy explained. "So you haven't lost anything. We won't change a thing. You and I will carry on as usual, and I'll still see Jim, or I'll take half of everything we own in a divorce and continue to see Jim. It's your call. Most of our co-workers and friends already know the truth about you. The only ones left in the dark are the boys and your buddies. It's all about your pride, isn't it? We can keep up the facade of being husband and wife, or why would I even want to be intimate with you anymore?" Dusty retorted, "You're having an affair with him. You've made that crystal clear. I'm just an afterthought. I'm not accepting leftovers from James Fielding's flings. Feel better now, Dusty? Now that you've got to label me as a whore? What's next? Accusing me of all sorts of nonsense. God, he nailed it about you. You're nothing but a small-minded man." Fielding's laughter filled the room as Dusty was escorted out, his laughter echoing in Dusty's ears as he left. He swallowed his tears, barely keeping them at bay. "Did you see the look on Hub's face when he saw that painting?" Fielding joked to Tracy. "You do realize he's sharp enough to figure out when that was painted. At least he's onto something," Tracy admitted. "Yeah, I suppose I owe him an apology, but when he practically accused me of cheating, I felt like I had to retaliate somehow. The painting was a brilliant move, Jim." "But you were cheating on him then," Fielding smirked. Tracy followed Dusty out, knowing she needed to console her husband. Truthfully, Dusty had questioned his wife multiple times in the past year when things didn't add up, but Tracy always brushed it off, accusing him of not trusting her. That argument always silenced Dusty, leaving him feeling guilty for doubting his wife of 27 years. As they drove home, Dusty reflected on Tracy's 12-year career at Scott Hansen LLC. After staying home to raise their 2 sons until they started school, Tracy decided she wanted to return to work. Initially, she worked under Old Man Hansen, the firm's senior partner. But when Hansen retired 3 years ago, he was replaced by 35-year-old Fielding, a 6'4", 220-pound guy, who made 47-year-old Tracy uncomfortable with the way he eyed her. She had initially gushed about her new boss for the first couple of months, but then abruptly stopped talking about him. Dusty knew that Tracy still turned heads with her long hair and incredible figure. He always thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever met, and often wondered how lucky he was to have her. Not that Dusty was unattractive. He stood at 5'9", a solid 170 pounds. He was naturally quiet and analytical, traits typical of accountants, which he happened to be. When Dusty learned that Tracy's new boss was a tall, handsome younger man, he decided to keep an eye on her activities. Tracy didn't work late with Fielding any more than she had with the previous boss, at least not until about a year ago. Then, the late nights became more frequent before a week-long trip to New Orleans with Fielding for a legal symposium. Dusty wasn't thrilled about Tracy making the trip, but he understood that as her admin, there would be times she'd have to travel. He voiced his concerns to Tracy, who loudly accused him of not trusting her, despite their more than 25 years of marriage. Dusty returned home no longer in the Christmas spirit and poured himself a single malt scotch, sinking into his favorite lazy boy. "It's not every day your life falls apart in minutes." He sobbed for the next 5 minutes until he fell asleep in his chair while watching the classic Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Tracy finally woke him up at 1:45 a.m., urging him to sleep in their bed. "I have to admit, I didn't see that coming, Tracy," Dusty said with little emotion. Tracy blushed deeply, indicating she hadn't considered their children when posing for the portrait. Dusty struggled to control his anger toward his wife. She would never know that her late father-in-law's teachings likely prevented him from lashing out physically. When he calmed down, Dusty unclenched his fists. Tracy noticed the movement, her eyes widening. A sudden realization struck her that she might have pushed her husband too far. "Since we're being honest, answer me 2 questions. Why? And how long?" Dusty inquired. Tracy stared at the carpet for a moment, her expression changing. "We didn't plan for this. It just happened. About a year ago, Jim and I discovered we had a lot in common. Our marriage had become stale, Jim's assertive, and he took charge of me. I liked it. A lot," Tracy confessed. "And when you accused me of cheating, I got angry. Jim and I devised a plan for me to get back at you. But you were already cheating. That's not revenge. It's rubbing it in my face," Dusty retorted. Tracy glanced at Dusty, then lowered her head silently. "So you chose new and exciting over our old, stable life. All those years meant nothing to you?" Dusty exclaimed. "I still love you, Dusty, but I'm not in love with you anymore. Jim and I connect on many levels, and it's thrilling," Tracy explained. "Of course it's thrilling. You're a new conquest for him, and he's a new thrill for you. You haven't faced the everyday struggles with him, raised children, or shared daily chores. And what about that painting? You'd never let me take a risque photo of you, yet you posed without clothes for some painter so Jim could display you in his home for everyone to see," Dusty criticized. Tracy blushed deeply, focusing on her shoes. Dusty kept his gaze on her until she finally looked up. "It was exciting, being undressed in front of another man right after closeness with Jim, knowing he was recording our lovemaking for everyone," Tracy admitted. "Did you sleep with the painter too?" Dusty blurted out. "Well, once, after my last posing session," Tracy confessed. "Jim and I felt like we owed him something after teasing him all week." "Fair's fair," Dusty remarked sarcastically. After an awkward silence, he asked, "Did you forget about the boys?" Tracy retorted, "What do they have to do with this?" Dusty argued, "Breaking up our family affects the boys too. You can't ignore that." Tracy ridiculed, "You don't want anyone knowing you're a fool. Plus, I know you love me. Give me a chance and we can go back to how things were." Dusty expressed his disappointment. "I thought you loved me as much as I loved you, and I thought you were smarter than this." Tracy pulled a face, so Dusty clarified, "A no-fault divorce doesn't mean no one's at fault. It just means the state avoids the hassle of assigning blame and dividing assets." Dusty continued, "I'm not afraid to admit my faults because you were unfaithful." "What do you think the boys will say about this?" Tracy stuttered, struggling to speak. Finally, she managed to choke out, "You wouldn't." Dusty replied firmly, "Watch me," Tracy accused. "You'd ruin my relationship with the boys just to get back at me? You're despicable." She hesitated before adding, "No, not to ruin your relationship, but to share my side of the story, you know." Dusty stated, "The truth hurts, doesn't it?" Confident at the start of the confrontation, Tracy looked defeated as she whispered, "Can't we discuss this more?" Dusty shook his head, saying, "I'm afraid not." Dusty reminded her, "You had closeness with him in his bed. Now you have to deal with the consequences." He continued, "Besides, I've never given you any reason to think I'd tolerate you cheating on me." The couple's sons were shocked when their father called them the next day. "Are you sure about this, Dad? That doesn't sound like Mom at all," Robbie, the eldest, exclaimed. "She even got a painting done showing her after love with him. It's hanging above his bar," Dusty explained. "That's absurd," Robbie exclaimed. Mike, the younger brother, listened quietly to Dusty's story before commenting, "Wow, Dad, what did you do to upset Mom so much?" Dusty sat silently for a moment, contemplating his son's disbelief. "I think I let her down after all these years. He was younger, stronger, and basically someone new and exciting," Dusty admitted. "I don't buy it, Dad." "Sorry," Mike said. "Believe what you want, Mike. She betrayed me, and I won't stand for it." Tracy was served divorce papers a week later. She attempted to resist, hoping to convince the judge to order marital counseling. It seemed like she was gaining the judge's sympathy until Dusty brought up the topic of the nude painting of her hanging in James Fielding's house. The judge appeared stunned by Dusty's revelation. "Seriously?" he inquired. "Naked and quite content by the looks of it, in another man's residence, Mrs. Dustman?" Tracy began to respond to the judge when her lawyer intervened, advising her to remain silent rather than admitting to the judge that she was foolish and arrogant after cheating on her husband. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized, with assets divided evenly. Since the house was sold as part of the settlement, Tracy moved in with her lover, while Dusty relocated to a small apartment close to his workplace. Jim Fielding had just poured himself a drink at his bar when he glanced at the painting of his lover, Tracy Dustman. He reminisced about the enjoyable experience of having Tracy pose for that painting after they had intercourse multiple times, her expression reflecting her satisfaction. With Tracy's husband becoming suspicious of her affair, the two lovers decided to preemptively reveal the affair and flaunt it in his face. They were confident that her reserved, unsuspecting husband would succumb to the new arrangement. If not, Tracy would claim half of Dusty's belongings, and Jim would keep enjoying her company. The divorce happened a little over a year ago, but lately, things had been tense between Tracy and Fielding. She seemed to be getting more attached, even though Jim had always been clear that he didn't want to get married. About a year and a half into their relationship, Tracy noticed that the passion of their affair had faded, along with the physical intimacy. With Dusty, she could rely on 27 years of love and affection, those little gestures and touches. She began to realize that love and lust were only similar in the first letter of their names. 6 months later, Tracy got her own small apartment after she and Jim Fielding split up. A week after that, she was assigned to work as an assistant for one of the newer lawyers. She saw the change coming, but since the pay and benefits remained the same, she welcomed it. Her new boss was a good-looking recent graduate from Georgetown Law School, with the confidence of a rising star attorney, Tracy thought to herself. She wondered if that confidence came with the law degree. It didn't take long before her new boss made a move on her. Despite promising herself not to let him get to her, she ended up lying to herself. 6 weeks into her new job, 52-year-old Tracy found herself in a passionate encounter with her 31-year-old boss. "Did I mention that you're quite the catch?" Fielding asked the young attorney a couple of weeks later, referring to the painting above his bar as just a tease. Mr. Hotshot nodded in agreement. "Got rid of that painting," Fielding mentioned. "Donated it to some fancy strip club about an hour from here. Got $5,000 cash for it. I'll write off the full $15,000 purchase price on my taxes." The two lawyers chuckled together. The playpen wasn't Dusty's usual scene for a Friday night, but when Jerry Kubiak, his oldest son's best man, organized the bachelor party, he felt obligated to invite Dusty out of respect. He figured Dusty would stick around for a bit, then leave before things got too wild. The group of 15 arrived at the upscale club in Massachusetts. After passing ID check at the door, they proceeded down a corridor leading to the main area of the club. Just before entering the main room, they noticed a painting on the wall. Jerry, playing the host for the evening, was the first to spot it. "Oh wow, check out that painting. That might be the hottest one I've ever seen. All my ladies look like that after I'm done with them," exclaimed Willie Aguilar, another one of Robbie's groomsmen. "Holy crap, no way!" Jerry shouted, stopping abruptly after reading the name tag on the painting. He fell silent, but Willie, unaware of what he was about to reveal, read the tag out loud for everyone. "Thou shalt not covet!" Willie exclaimed. "Tracy Dustman, painted by Emile Gaultier." "Hey, Robbie, she shares the same name," Willie said, only realizing what he had just read afterward. The rest of the group crowded forward to see what had caught Willie's attention. The rest of the group crowded in to see what was on the card. Robbie's face turned pale as he read it and glanced at the painting. He quickly looked back at his father, then at his younger brother, Mike. Dusty just shrugged as Mike's face flushed red. "Been there? Seen that?" Dusty remarked to both boys, continuing to walk. The sons exchanged looks, joining the rest of the party at 3 tables by the stage, all eyes on Dusty, waiting for an explanation. "This is how your mother and her scumbag lawyer lover broke the news to me about her cheating," Dusty began, pointing at the painting. "It was hanging behind the bar at his house. They didn't label it, but I recognized her immediately, even with the black hair they added as a joke. It was at one of their Christmas parties, and apparently everyone at the law firm knew about their affair and the painting." Dusty's voice tightened with anger. They both found it hilarious that I found out. Dad, you have to get them to take that down. That's Mom, Robbie urged, aghast. And that's your father. Dusty nodded. I'll talk to the manager, but you didn't seem too bothered when I first told you about her affair years ago. You even wondered what I did to upset her. Mike looked sheepish as the group cast accusing glances at him. Please, Dad, do something, Mike pleaded. Despite the commotion, Dusty remained the calmest person in the group. Quietly, he rose from his seat at the bar and approached the manager. There was a lot of gesturing and some raised voices before Dusty returned to the group, who were mostly sitting quietly, unlike typical groups at a strip club. The manager says the owner bought the painting from a private seller, and it's been a popular addition to the club. If I want it taken down, I can buy it for 10 grand, Dusty explained. I told him I had no desire to spend 10 grand on an erotic painting of my cheating ex-wife. Dad, both Robbie and Mike exclaimed. With that, the evening's activities came to an end. Dusty's sons headed straight to their mother's apartment upon returning to Chicago. Dusty went back to his own apartment and slept soundly. Tracy looked worn out as she took her seat in the groom's parents' row a few minutes before the wedding was set to begin. Dusty couldn't help but notice. He assumed that spending hours explaining an erotic nude painting at a strip club to his sons was tougher than he imagined. Last night wasn't too awkward, Dusty quipped sarcastically to his ex-wife as she sat a few feet away from him in the church pew. Did you know Scumsucker sold that painting? Not until last night, she replied, her face flushing with embarrassment. Since their divorce 5 years earlier, the former spouses had hardly spent any time in each other's company. Dusty had to acknowledge that Tracy still looked good, apart from her red, teary eyes. Following the ceremony and the mother-son dance, Tracy was a sought-after dance partner at the reception, especially among Robbie's friends. After chatting with Robbie and Mike the previous night, she understood why and was ready when some of the 20-somethings attempted to get too close or let their hands wander. There was a time when you would have shut this down pretty quickly, she remarked to Dusty as she returned to the table after dancing with her fifth partner. There was a time when you were my wife and my responsibility, Dusty replied quietly. Then you became someone else's responsibility. Now I suppose the responsibility is yours alone, but from what I've heard through the grapevine, you like them young. Just try to be somewhat discreet tonight for the boys' sake. Tracy's face showed her irritation, but she remained silent. She was aware that nearly all of her post-divorce encounters had been with men closer to her son's ages than her own, but she didn't know how her ex-husband was aware of this. When she wasn't dancing and was seated at the table with Dusty and several other family members, Tracy couldn't help but sneak glances at her ex-husband. She observed that the past 5 years had treated him well, with only a few lines on his face and some gray hair being noticeable changes. His piercing blue eyes remained unchanged, and his jawline was as striking as it was when they first met ages ago. God, I left this man for what? A little more closeness? A little more aggressive? Ugh, what an idiot, Tracy thought to herself. Yeah, sis, you blew it big time, said Tracy's sister in her ear, snapping Tracy out of her thoughts. Did I just blurt that out? She asked Hannah. Her sister chuckled softly before responding, No, but your stares at Dusty have been pretty obvious. Might as well just ask him to make love to you right here, Hannah added. Not just screw me silly. I want him to make love to me slowly like we used to, she clarified. Then cuddle afterward. No one's done that for me since we split. Maybe if you asked him nicely, Hannah suggested. After all, it's Dusty, the nicest guy in the world, if he still loves you even half as much as before. If asked, Dusty, the nicest guy around, would have admitted to still caring for his ex-wife to some extent. But he knew he could never trust Tracy again or recover from her betrayal with Fielding. Dusty didn't bother dating for a year after the divorce, despite several women at work showing interest once they learned he was single. He soon realized there were more single women than men in his age group. Finding dates wasn't hard. It was overcoming his trust issues that posed the challenge. The morning after the wedding, Dusty woke up in his apartment next to a beautiful blonde named Kristen Alfred, a friend of Robbie's bride. Kristen sat at the Alfred family table, observing young men dancing and groping the groom's mother, occasionally glancing at Dusty to gauge his reaction, or rather, his lack of reaction. Just like everyone else at the wedding, Kristen had heard about Robbie's parents and was curious about the dynamic between Dusty and his ex-wife. Assessing that Dusty wasn't pining for his ex, Kristen approached the Dustman family table and invited Dusty to dance. When Dusty looked at her, he saw a stunning blonde with long legs and a tailored dark blue dress. Noticing she wore no rings on her left hand, he smiled and stood up. Thanks to Tracy's love for dancing, Dusty had learned early in their marriage and was skilled on the dance floor. They made a handsome pair, even chatting during the slow songs as Kristen leaned in close. After that dance, Dusty didn't linger at the groom's table much. When they weren't dancing, he and Kristen sat together at the bride's table, focused only on each other. Dusty learned that Kristen, aged 52, taught high school an hour away from Chicago and had been divorced from an offensive husband for 20 years. "If you don't mind me asking," Dusty said, "how does a beautiful woman like you stay single for 20 years? I've got major trust issues, for starters. Plus, I don't just hop into bed with any guy," she replied matter-of-factly. "That's a good point," said Dusty with a smile. The next day, Dusty and Kristen began working on their trust issues together. About a year later, there was another wedding, bringing together the Dustman and Alfred families once again. Robbie stood proudly as his father's best man. Internal Revenue Service Special Agent Michael Dustman ensured that James Fielding faced audits for 12 consecutive years, resulting in over $1 million in additional taxes and fines for the attorney. Fielding arrived a few minutes late for his 12th audit at the IRS building, where his accountant was already waiting. Aware that someone had targeted him with the IRS, Fielding knew he had many enemies, making it challenging to identify the culprit. Frustrated, Fielding thought to himself that these IRS audits were costing him a fortune. Determined to find the person behind the reports, Fielding vowed retribution, asserting his identity as James Fielding, someone not to be trifled with. He was lost in his thoughts and didn't notice his surroundings when a man wearing a baseball hat and dark sunglasses brushed past him, extending his left hand. Fielding collapsed to the ground moments later, feeling a sharp pain in his groin. He barely registered the sound of a stun gun. A swift kick struck his nose, breaking it, followed by another blow to his jaw that snapped his head back. Before he could react, another hit his face. The attacker then positioned himself near Fielding's legs, raising his knee and bringing it down with force. Agonizing pain shot through Fielding's body, plunging him into darkness. Robbie grinned as he returned the weapon to his hoodie pocket, extracted 3 teeth from his shoe, and continued walking.